In recent years, you may have noticed an increase in the number of national awareness campaigns for mental health. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, Penn State hosted its own Mental Health Awareness Week. Now, while this awareness may seem like a recent development, mental illness is by no means a recent issue. It's an issue that's as old as humanity itself, and while mental illness hasn't changed, society's views on it have. I mean, up until the 18th century, we were calling the mentally ill witches and burning them at the stake. But the shift in America really began in 1841 when Dorothea Dix began her crusade for the rights of the mentally ill. This was the first time that society accepted that mental disorders were diseases and illnesses, and that those suffering from them were patients, not just crazy lunatics. Unfortunately, many of the institutions that she helped to establish weren't designed for rehabilitation. They were more of a disposal site for society's unwanted outcasts who were seen as an embarrassment. So as the number of mental institutions in the United States grew, they were more and more frequently built out in the countryside, isolated from civilization. The logic behind this was that the isolation would calm the patients and relieve their stress. But in reality, all it did was give society another reason to believe that the mentally ill were dangerous, or why else would the government lock them up so far away? As you can see from these pictures from the Library of Congress archives, early 20th century mental asylums also made the perfect settings for countless urban legends and children's horror stories. Finally, in 1946, the public became acutely aware of the plight of the mentally ill when Life magazine published an expose of the horrible conditions of the United States mental hospitals. In this article, the author says, "We jam-pack men, women, and children into 100-year-old fire traps in wards so crowded that the floors can't even be seen through the rickety cots." Also in the 1940s, another shift occurred because thousands of men were rejected from service in World War II because of mental disorders that they didn't even know they had. This made people realize just how broad the spectrum of mental illness was and just how easily it could affect a seemingly normal person. Finally, in 1955, Thorazine, the first ever antipsychotic drug, was discovered, and this completely changed treatment from dangerous lobotomies and electroshock therapy to a more practical drug therapy. This also began the process of deinstitutionalization, which, according to the U.S. Department of Health, between 1955 and 1994, decreased the number of patients in mental hospitals by 92%. So, due to the increase in drug therapy, families in the 1960s were much more willing to accept the responsibility of caring for a sick loved one because now treatment was as simple as taking a pill twice a day. This, coupled with the introduction of Medicaid in 1965, rapidly sped up the deinstitutionalization process. Then, in 1974, a group of disabled Vietnam veterans banded together to crusade for the rights of the disabled in America, and they were kind enough to include those with mental illnesses under their umbrella of disabilities, knowing that those with mental illnesses often can't speak for themselves. As a result of this, those with mental illnesses gained a few more legal, political, and civil rights. Now, throughout the 70s and 80s, the more negative effects of deinstitutionalization also became known. Thousands of patients were discharged from hospitals without any means of making sure that they would continue to take their medication regularly. And as a result, thousands of them relapsed and were rejected by their family, friends, and in some cases, their entire community. They ended up homeless on the street with no one to care for them. Now, despite this crisis of homelessness that continues into society even today, America has come a really long way in our views on the mentally ill. Just kidding, that was the slide, sorry, I thought there was another one. We have come a long way in our views on the mentally ill. State mental institutions now have a universal policy of rehabilitation and not institutionalization. And in a 1990 national survey, 90% of Americans said that they believe somebody suffering from a mental illness can lead a normal and healthy life. There's also been an increase in the number of community health, mental health clinics, and national awareness campaigns. And all of these together show that the mentally ill are no longer isolated lunatics, but are accepted members of society who have a support system of thousands of fellow citizens.